I used to believe that solitude was harmless, healing even. I believed that if I walked far enough away from people, from noise, from obligation, the world would soften its grip on me. That belief is what put me in those woods last winter. It is also the reason I no longer seek silence, because I learned too late that silence is never empty. I took time off work in late January when the cold had settled in so deeply that even the highways felt abandoned. I wanted isolation, the kind you can only find when snow erases the evidence of human presence. I loaded my truck with winter gear, enough food for a few days, fuel, and my tent. Roscoe, my dog, watched the process with the patient excitement of someone who knew an adventure was coming. He was a large mixed breed, strong and alert, and I trusted his instincts more than my own. The trail I chose wasn't on any popular map. It cut deep into a state forest, narrow enough that branches scraped the sides of my truck as I drove. Snow and ice coated the road, packed down into slick ridges that forced me to crawl forward at a cautious pace. There were no tire tracks, no signs of recent use. After nearly an hour of driving, my phone lost signal entirely. I remember smiling at that. I parked at a small, forgotten pull-off, half buried by snowbanks. From there, Roscoe and I hiked another 20 minutes, my breath fogging in the air, my boots crunching loudly in the otherwise dead quiet. When we reached a clearing surrounded by thick trees, the snow lay smooth and untouched, like the world had been paused. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anyone else had been there for a very long time. That should have warned me. I set up camp methodically, clearing snow, staking the tent deep into frozen ground, layering insulation inside. I was experienced enough to know winter camping was unforgiving. The cold steals heat faster than you realize. I wore thermal layers, thick socks, fleece, and a heavy jacket even while working. Roscoe stayed close, bounding through the snow, then returning to check in with me. As dusk settled in, I gathered dead wood and built a small fire. The flames crackled softly, a fragile pocket of warmth in the encroaching dark. I cooked a simple meal and ate sitting on a log. Roscoe curled near the fire, eyes half closed. The forest absorbed the sound of the flames. Snow does that. It smothers noise, presses it down until everything feels muted, unreal. That was when Roscoe stood up and started barking. At first, I dismissed it. Deer were common in the area, and he'd barked at them before. I told him to relax, and after a moment, he did. But 20 minutes later, he barked again, louder, sharper. Then I heard it too. Footsteps. They moved through the snow beyond the firelight, slow, deliberate. I stood and listened. The footsteps stopped, then started again. Roscoe's barking turned into a low growl, then abruptly stopped altogether. He froze, staring toward the tree line. That was when I saw him. A shape stood just beyond the reach of the firelight, half hidden among the trees. A man? Watching? I called out, trying to sound casual, saying he startled me, telling Roscoe it was okay. The man didn't answer. He stepped forward just enough for his face to catch the light. He asked what I was doing out there. His tone wasn't friendly. I told him I was camping with my dog. He laughed quietly and said something about hospitality, about how it wasn't polite to threaten someone instead of inviting them to join you. I told him I was armed. That made him smile wider. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness. I told myself he was gone. I put out the fire completely, smothering every ember. I crawled into my tent, sealed it shut, and lay awake listening to the silence press in from all sides. Hours later, footsteps returned. They came right up to the tent and stopped. Roscoe growled, then howled. I held my breath, gun in hand, heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I told whoever it was to leave. After a long pause, the footsteps retreated. I didn't sleep, not really. By dawn, I packed up and fled those woods, never looking back. I believed that was the end of it. I was wrong. The man who moved wrong. I told myself for months that what happened in the woods was an isolated incident, a coincidence, a stranger with poor social instincts who wandered too close to the wrong campsite. I replayed it over and over, trying to drain it of meaning, but fear doesn't fade when you analyze it. It only waits for context. That context came in July. July 4th weekend, 2025. I drove from Melbourne, Florida to Charleston, South Carolina to visit my friend Mark. We hadn't seen each other in years. He was there on an internship for his law program, renting a narrow house in the city with windows that faced another apartment building and a web of alleyways behind it. Charleston was alive that weekend. Tourists, fireworks, music spilling from open doors. It felt like the opposite of the forest. Crowded, bright, safe, or so I thought. The first 2 days were normal. We played pickleball, walked the market, ate too much street food. It wasn't until the afternoon near the docks that something slipped out of place. We saw him crossing the road. He wore a wedding suit, black, perfectly pressed, with a crisp white shirt and a bow tie that sat too neatly at his collar. His dress shoes were spotless. His long black curly hair framed a tan, expressionless face. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't homeless. He didn't look lost. He moved slowly, not injured, not tired, just delayed, like the world was a second ahead of him. I felt it immediately, a sharp, instinctive rejection. We were about to cross the street directly into his path, but I grabbed Mark's arm and pulled him back. I told him we weren't crossing. I didn't explain why. Mark looked at me strangely but followed. As we walked away, I kept glancing back. The man never acknowledged us. His eyes didn't track movement. He simply continued forward, shambling with that same measured slowness. Mark said it was strange, too clean, too formal, like someone dressed for the wrong event in the wrong decade. We laughed it off. Then we saw him again, several streets away, a different direction entirely, same pace, same posture, same suit. There was no reasonable way he could have gotten there ahead of us. We stared. He didn't look at us. He drifted down the street and vanished into a crowd. I told myself it was coincidence. Charleston was busy, people wear costumes, weddings happen, but coincidence doesn't repeat itself with precision. The third time we saw him was the night of July 5th. The city was packed, restaurants glowing, sidewalks overflowing. We'd just finished a ghost tour, something we booked as a joke, something lighthearted. The irony didn't register until later. A wave of people moved toward us down a wide street, and there he was, in the center of the crowd. He didn't move with them. They flowed around him like water around a stone. 2 people brushed his shoulders without reacting, without turning their heads. No one noticed him except us. He glanced at me, just for a second, and in that second I felt the same cold recognition I'd felt in the woods, the sensation of being seen by something that didn't belong. Mark stopped walking. So did I. We watched as the crowd thinned and the man continued on alone, unchanged, until he turned down a darker side street and disappeared. Neither of us spoke. That night, I slept on the couch downstairs near the windows, Sometime after midnight, a tapping woke me. Soft, deliberate. I lifted the blind just enough to see down the alley. At the far end, a man turned a corner. The same suit, the same posture. Before he vanished, he looked back toward the window, and I knew, absolutely knew, that this wasn't coincidence anymore. I drove back to Florida on July 6th. The highway stretched endlessly, flat and sun-bleached, but my thoughts refused to move forward. Every rest stop felt watched. Every car that stayed behind me too long made my shoulders tense. I told myself it was exhaustion, too many late nights, too much stimulation. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Home was supposed to reset me. I lived alone in a small house I'd bought a few years earlier. Quiet neighborhood, predictable routine. I worked from home, ordered groceries, went to the gym late at night when it was empty. I liked control. I liked knowing what sounds belonged where. That routine is why it took me too long to realize something was wrong. The first sound came on a Tuesday night around 2:30 a.m. I was half asleep on the couch, TV murmuring low, when I heard a dull thump near the back of the house. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to register. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. I checked the back door. Locked. Everything normal. I went to bed. The next morning, the door felt wrong. The deadbolt worked, but the handle felt loose, twisted slightly downward as if someone had leaned their weight into it. I told myself I'd fix it later. That night, I went to the gym around 11 p.m. like always. When I returned just after midnight, my porch light was off. I never turn it off. I sat in my car for a full minute, replaying the day. Eventually, I convinced myself I must have done it absent-mindedly. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. On Thursday morning, I woke to my alarm and noticed my phone was at 12%. I always charged it overnight. The cable was still connected to my phone, but the charger was no longer plugged into the outlet. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to construct a memory that fit. None did. That night, I stayed up in the dark, TV off, listening. At 3 a.m., I heard slow thumps from the back of the house, not random, not settling, footsteps. They stopped when I held my breath. The next morning, I found muddy shoe prints near the back door, smudged, deliberately wiped. I hadn't had anyone over. I hadn't stepped outside in mud. That was when fear stopped being abstract. I called a locksmith and told him the lock was failing. He replaced it that afternoon. I didn't tell him about the footprints. That night, I wedged a chair under the back door handle and locked my bedroom door. At 3:47 a.m., I woke to tapping. Not knocking, testing, fingertips against wood. I stared at the door until my eyes burned. The tapping stopped. Soft footsteps retreated. In the morning, the chair was still there. The back door was unlocked. The new lock was undamaged. Someone had turned it from the inside. I called the police. They found no forced entry. They suggested I might have unlocked it myself. I knew better. That night, I didn't sleep. All the lights stayed on. A kitchen knife sat on the table. Around 2 a.m., I heard movement from the basement. The door was cracked open. I approached it slowly and peered down the stairwell. At the bottom, I saw the outline of someone standing there. I slammed the door shut and ran. I called 911 from my car. When the police arrived, they searched the house. They brought him out in handcuffs, barefoot, dark clothes, silent. He didn't look at me. They found food wrappers, bottled water, insulation used as bedding, and a phone charger plugged into the basement. He had been living there, watching, learning my schedule. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. The house didn't feel empty after they took him away. That was the first thing I noticed. Police cars left, sirens faded, doors closed. Silence returned, but it wasn't relief. It was absence, like a pressure that had been removed too suddenly. The air felt wrong. Every room felt watched by memory. An officer told me I could go back inside. I didn't want to. I sat in my car until the sun started to rise, watching my own front door like it might open again on its own. When I finally stepped inside, nothing had changed, and that was worse. Days passed in a fog. I slept with lights on. I avoided the basement entirely. Every creak sent adrenaline flooding my system. Friends checked in, but I didn't explain everything. How do you tell someone your home learned you? A week later, I was scrolling through my phone to send a friend a photo when I saw something that stopped my breath. A photo I did not remember taking. It was timestamped 3:11 a.m. The image showed my bedroom, my bed, me. I was asleep. The angle was wrong, too high, too close, taken from inside the room. I stared at it until my vision tunneled. The blankets pulled to my chest. My face turned slightly toward the camera. I felt sick. The memory clicked into place instantly. The unplugged charger, the drained battery. Someone had used my phone. I contacted the police unit listed on the incident report. They asked me to come in immediately. I transferred the image digitally. The room went quiet when they saw it. One officer exhaled slowly and said this changed things. Stalking, unlawful surveillance, potential sexual offenses. They asked if I recognized the man. I said no, that wasn't entirely true. Because later that night, alone again, I finally allowed myself to ask the question I'd been avoiding. Where had I seen him before? And the answer came with horrifying clarity. The woods, the way he stood, the way he watched, the silence, the stillness, and Charleston, the man who moved wrong. I realized then that the terror wasn't about one place. It was about being chosen. The detective assigned to my case called me 3 days after I turned over the photo. He didn't sound alarmed. That scared me more than panic would have. He asked questions that felt unrelated at first. How long I'd lived in the house, my work schedule, where I shopped, what gym I went to, what time I usually left and returned. Then he asked about travel. I told him about Charleston. There was a pause on the line. He asked me to come in. At the station, he showed me a printed timeline pinned to a corkboard. Dates, locations, CCTV stills, transit records. The man they arrested didn't have a name yet, not one they trusted. No fixed address, no social media, minimal digital footprint. But patterns leave residue. They found him on traffic cameras near my neighborhood weeks before I ever noticed anything wrong. Standing at corners, watching houses, always alone. They found him near the state forest months earlier. That made my chest tighten. He had been cited once, years ago, for trespassing near a campground. No charges stuck, no follow-up. Charleston wasn't coincidence. They pulled street footage from July 4th weekend. He appeared on multiple cameras, always drifting, never interacting, always clean, always wearing the same suit. One still frame froze him mid-step, head slightly turned, looking straight at the camera. The detective told me something I still hear in my sleep. He doesn't look for people, he looks for routines. They believed he noticed me at the campground first, not because I was alone, but because I was careful, predictable, methodical. People like that leave trails. After Charleston, he followed me south. He learned my house, my schedule, my silence. They estimated he'd been living in my basement for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks of footsteps, 6 weeks of watching, 6 weeks of knowing I was asleep above him. I asked why the suit. The detective hesitated. "It makes him invisible," he said. "People don't question what looks like it belongs." I moved out 2 days later. What stays after I did not take anything with me when I moved out except clothes, my laptop and Roscoe. Everything else felt contaminated. I stayed with a friend for a while, then rented a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that required a key fob, cameras, and a concierge. Even then, I slept lightly. I memorized the sound of elevators, the rhythm of footsteps in the hallway, the difference between pipes and movement. People think fear ends when danger is removed. It doesn't. It relocates. I couldn't shower without checking behind the curtain. I couldn't sleep without locking my phone in a drawer. I charged it during the day, never at night. Basements became impossible. Silence became loud. The man never spoke during interrogation. That, the detective told me, was deliberate. Some predators deny language because language gives shape to accountability. Without words, he remained an outline. The trial moved slowly. Psychological evaluations labeled him highly intelligent, obsessive, non-delusional. He did not hallucinate. He did not believe himself invisible. He relied on predictability. He pleaded guilty. I was not required to attend sentencing. I still read the report. Decades. That should have been relief. It wasn't, because closure implies an ending, and some things don't end. Months later, on a cold evening, I took Roscoe for a walk. We passed a man in a clean black suit waiting at a crosswalk. My body reacted before my mind did. Heart racing, breath caught. It wasn't him. But fear doesn't need accuracy. It only needs memory. I don't camp anymore. I don't travel without telling someone where I'm going. I don't assume silence means safety. Sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet and the snow outside dulls the city sounds, I think about that first clearing in the woods. How empty it felt. How wrong I was. Because silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of witnesses. If you are reading this somewhere quiet, listen carefully. If the quiet listens back, leave.